Katerina.
Hello.
So we're going to start off then with an exclusive interview by the Syrian president given to an Egyptian magazine.
Yeah, this is an Egyptian weekly magazine, Alam al-Arabi, but it's been cited in a lot of international media. As you say, an exclusive interview with the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Content-wise, perhaps not really anything new or surprising, just things we've heard before from him. He says that the door is always open to dialogue with protesters, but he says and stresses again, these aren't protesters in Syria, these are terrorists. And he goes on to say that there's not a great deal of popular support for these people who he calls terrorists. He does say that he justifies the use of force, saying if someone picks up a gun and shoots the Syrian army, well, they better expect that the Syrian army is going to shoot back. Interestingly, he also criticises Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, for sort of siding against him, saying that this is all to do with a regional power play. And so as I said, perhaps nothing too surprising, but obviously an interview first in a few months that's going to be drawing a lot of attention into international press.
And meanwhile, plenty of press analysis and reactions of the reactions, in the protests to that anti-Islam film made in
Yes, exactly. That innocence of Muslims. That, if you remember, it appeared on YouTube sort of globally. Now, YouTube is owned by Google. A piece on the Daily Beast news site questions, was Google right not to take down this video earlier? The White House actually specifically asked Google to remove the video. Google said no, and this piece examines how far does freedom of speech go? How does media, and particularly internet content providers, how do they balance that line between what is in the public interest and what is a threat to national security? But the piece, very interestingly, does point out, you know, just because we protect freedom of speech, particularly in America, just because we protect freedom of speech doesn't mean that we can't publicly criticise the people who then choose to use that freedom of speech. However, on the other side of the world, looking at the Australian newspaper, very popular, the popular paper there, an opinion piece by journalist Graham Richardson. Now, they've had their own protests with regards to this innocence of Muslim films in Sydney, very large Lebanese Muslim community there. Now, Richardson doesn't beat about the bush. He says what's causing these protests, or what's allowed sort of the environment for these protesters to fester, is extremists. He says we've got to get rid of the political correctness that is stopping us from saying you're an extremist. He says there's too much fear of being accused of being racist. He says if this is just allowed to fester, this social problem is going to get even worse. However, it is important to point out that Islamic community leaders who spoke to another paper in Australia, the Sydney Morning Herald, have said that the media have reacted to this protest in a way that's really sort of generated quite a climate of violence and fear within the Australian Islamic community. So both sides of the story there.
Okay, now we're going to move on to protests in India over government reforms to the retail industry.
Yeah, but first off, we're going to look at how The Independent, the British newspapers, covered these widespread protests in India about the decision by the Indian government to open up the retail industry to foreign direct investment. They say this is an outraged nation of shopkeepers. Journalists on the ground spoke to some of the shopkeepers, took a bit of a temperature of what people were thinking, a lot of anger, a lot of sort of perceived injustice, but also a lot of resolve. You know, how are we going to beat these big boys that might come into our country? They spoke to one shopkeeper, Kumal, who says he's going to continue delivering his one packet of washing up liquid free of charge. He says that's a service that Walmart do not provide.
Okay. Well, finally, one man could be making a fortune on a very lucky purchase at an auction.
Absolutely. There's no way we couldn't get to this story. This is in The Guardian today, a lovely piece. 54-year-old Jonathan Wheel, who works in an art investment fund, he found a few years ago at a golf club auction in Kent what he believed was a work of the Grand Master Joseph William Turner, a piece he believes is the fishing boats in a stiff breeze, painted in 1805. He bought it at auction for £3,700, and for the past few years has been taking it to experts to have scientific tests, saying, come on, this really is a Turner. There's been a lot of toing and froing in the art world, some saying yes, some saying no. However, it has now been valued by an insurance company for £20 million.
He's made quite a profit.
He could potentially make quite a profit. There's a big conference of art experts in London today to say once and for all whether this is definitively a work by the Grand Master. So fingers crossed for Jonathan Will that it is.
I very much hope it is. It looks like a turner to me.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Thanks very much indeed, Katharina, for that look at today's newspapers. Well, still to come here on Live from Paris, Apple launches its new iPhone in 9 countries today, including here in France, but there is a threat